Street. They are looking to demolish the top portion of the bell tower, and they did include in the agenda, we did, and replace it with a pitched roof to match the main structure. I just want to remind everyone that we do not have a historic preservation ordinance in town, so the Historic Resources Committee doesn't do a review, design review, if you will, but this is strictly for the demolition of the structure or the portion of it. And I will, after I briefly touch on a couple of things, then we can let the applicant introduce themselves, and the commission is here, and I think Pat Scaling is going to be the act as chair today for it. Again, this is regulated by Chapter 290, 5.2. We'll go with A1, and that is the demolition. And there's a process that's involved here. Notice and submittal requirements, et cetera. And it's really about this is a demolition delay ordinance. It's not a demolition, prevent a demolition ordinance or a design review ordinance. It's a delay ordinance. And what the commission or the committee needs to find as part of this waiting period. And this is, I sent this around to the committee members earlier today, and I think everyone's had it before. This is not your first demolition reviews. But the committee needs to determine whether or not this portion of the structure is contributing or architecturally or historically significant. And if it is, if the committee finds that it is, then what the applicant and the property owner need to do is they do a historic recordation of that portion of the structure, and there's a process for that, and the Secretary of the Interior Standards governs that. That's laid out in the ordinance. And again, it's not doesn't stop the demo, but it does record it. And what that is it uses, again, the Secretary of Interior Standards for documenting historic properties. Happens when historic properties are demolished, especially if there's a federal undertaking, et cetera. So that's the process that's in play for this property and for this review. The town adopted this a few years ago, and I'll let Pat, I guess I can let you take it from here. If you have any questions or process, I'm here. Does that sound good?
I guess the only thing I would add to that,
Yep.
if I could,
Oh, yeah.
is that during the 120-day delay period, there is an opportunity to work with recommendations from the Historic Resources Committee to find alternative
Right.
alternative solutions to the demolition of a section of a building.
Correct. I'm sorry I didn't include that. You are correct. That is in the ordinance as well.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. So could we introduce the
Sure.
people who are here today
Chuck
ourselves?
and maybe the applicant, you would need to grab a microphone. There's one right here. Chuck?
Just push the
Wanna-
button.
Screen to me. I can scream.
Now,
The
Push
table.
the green button.
and Chuck, maybe go ahead,
Yep.
introduce yourself and the folks from the church and describe your project, I guess.
My name is Chuck Campbell. I'm an architect that has been hired by St. Thomas Church. And two members of the church are here, Lisa Fry and Edmund Hart. Members of the church are here.
I would point out that Lisa is the minister of the church.
Sorry.
Is it away?
This bell tower has been an issue for them for some time. When the church was originally built in the 20s, I believe, this bell tower was not part of the church. It was added, I believe, about 10 years later. And as I mentioned, they have had trouble with leaking in the past, and it has been a recurring issue. So a few years ago, they had envelope specialists come and do an assessment of the tower, actually the whole church. But in my application, I provided a copy of their survey and recommendations. One of the things that they suggested that the church do was wrap it, which is what is over there right now, to protect it from further deterioration because it was deteriorating fairly rapidly. It wasn't in any of the written documentation, but they was advised that they should not use the bells anymore at this point due to fear that the vibration was going to deteriorate the masonry faster and rapid. It would speed up the deterioration. So, we have gone through looking at what it would take to rebuild it as it is. But what we come up with was a suggestion or a proposal to take off the top portion where the leaking is really the biggest issue and replace it with a pitched roof that will tie into the church with the same pitch. So realistically, in my opinion, I think it will look like it's been there all along. I do have that basically is just a quick rendition of what is there right now. And I did the same thing for what we're proposing. And that is what we are proposing. I'm sure people have questions. I would be more than happy to try to answer.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes.
I have here a drawing of the church before the tower was added to show that for 10 years there was no tower. And it's not really a tower because it was never as high as the peak of the church itself. We also I have found these in the architect's archives up at Orono, letters from 1945 telling the church that the tower needed to be rebuilt then, and the church never did it. They've patched it ever since. There are organ pipes under part of this tower, and there's a chapel in it. So we certainly want to keep the inside just as it is. But we don't want it to leak, and we don't want to continually have to spend money on repairing masonry. So that's why we've chosen this over rebuilding it or shortening it, or as they said in 1945, you really should make it taller to get the bells up above the ridge so the sound would then project all over town.
And just to note, to add on to what Edmund had mentioned, is with what we're doing, we're not looking at changing anything on the interior. The interior is going to stay as it is. The only thing that's going away is the open bell crenellation on the top. So the chapel inside will remain as it is.
Can I ask a question? May I ask a question?
Go ahead, Rhonda.
You mentioned just briefly that you looked into preserving the tower, but you didn't expand on that. What was your findings when you looked into that? What was done?
What was done is it is very expensive to tear it down and rebuild it as it is.
There's more to it than that. May I speak to this?
Sure.
What we found when we talked to the preservationists is that they couldn't guarantee that this was going to correct the problems that we've been having since 1945. They said it would look pretty, but we would have to do significant repairs on it every year to keep it functioning. So we asked them what we could do, and they recommended that we not rebuild the crenellation on the top, and we put something there more like what it had originally, so that the problems with the roof would not continue the way they had. We had to put money into this project about every 10 years just to keep it functional. I also want to point out that when the architect designed the crenellation roof on the top of this structure, he had done it 10 feet taller than it is currently, and the rector couldn't build it that high because he ran out of funding, at which point the architect said it wouldn't work and walked off the project.
Do you think that if you modified the design, that you could prevent some of the water leakage problems if you were to restore it? Like the louvered windows could be done differently so that you don't get rain in them, or the roof runoff could be sealed a little better. I'm remembering what I had seen in reports and pictures, that the cricket could be modified, so that there would be less maintenance in the future.
When we looked into it, rebuilding it, as Chuck said, would be very expensive. But to answer your question, we would still have to, if we left it alone, we would still have to take it down and build it back up to prevent it. There's no way to patch this or to spend less money to get to the same point that we want to get to, which is no leaks and less maintenance. So I'm not sure if I'm quite answering your question, but the cricket would have to be rebuilt and modified, and all the stones, because you see the stone tower has stones on the outside and rubble stone on the inside of the wall, making a 18-inch, 2-foot thick wall. And those layers are separating from each other because water has seeped in and frozen. So the whole thing is very unstable. So there's not, engineers have told us you can't just rebuild the top, you have to take it down and start over. And then that's where it gets more expensive than taking it down and putting a same pitched roof on it as the pitch is on the main body of the church.
I have a question. I noticed in the BES report, the building envelope specialist report, that in 2019, they did a cost estimate of what it would cost to restore the tower at about $680,000, they estimated. And I'm wondering, do you have an estimate of what the cost is to take off the tower and then rebuild the structure that is proposed?
Yes, we have signed a contract with a contractor that includes some other things, so the numbers are not going to be exact. And that number is a little under $1 million. It's also true that since BES gave us that estimate, building costs
Right.
have risen probably 30-40% since then?
Yep.
I'm
So
aware of that.
So then the numbers, because we have some other stonework repair in this current contract, as well as replacing all of the copper gutters because they are all worn out. And the roof, brand new roof on the body of the church also. The slate roof has reached the end of its life.
And BES noted that as well and
Right.
said that it could be around $150 for the whole, $150,000 for the whole roof. Well, one of my concerns is that it is a historic building, and removing features from a building really reduces the historic aspect or character of the building. And I kind of looked at the old tower, and there's the crenellation, which is a feature of that period. The window decorations are features of the period. And my other feature, besides the bell feature would be missing. And it's you know, it's a pretty drastic historic change to the building. I know what you're proposing looks like it might fit with what's going to be removed,
Looks like the original.
but it isn't what has been there for the last 100, almost 100 years. 80 years. I mean, for 80 years, that's been a historic building. And when it was put on the National Register, it was put on as the total building with the tower. So that's my concern, that
Wait a minute, this building is not on the historic register. It's part of the district.
Part of the district, yeah.
district, it's the
It's
district.
different, though. Having a historic building is different than being in a historic district.
But it's still
It's not the same thing.
recognized as a contributing member of the historic district. I mean, there are non-contributing, meaning it doesn't have as much status, and then there's contributing. Well, I'm just throwing it out there because I feel compelled to say that mostly these things could be addressed as suggested by the building envelope specialists. You know, they have addressed those and they've said that it could be done. And so I'm wondering if the costs are similar to what the cost of the others are.
Now the cost for doing it, preserving it, and going all the way back to the original is about $2 million, twice the cost of what we were spending on this project.
Okay. Have you considered any resources for some of those funds there? Because there are resources out there. I am familiar because someone on our committee in the past has talked about a church that was restored in South Carolina, and there's a fund for the restoration of historic places.
We have not found that they are interested in our building. We have looked, but we have not found any significant contributors because it's not old enough.
So, well, I made
Less than 100 years
list
old.
if you're interested. There, you know, there's a Steeples Fund for Maine.
I have looked at the Steeples Fund. It's a matching grant, and we would first have to get over the hurdle of whether this is a steeple or not. They might well argue that it's not. And I think the maximum amount they give is $50,000, I think. It's not a lot. Right.
Yeah, it's $50,000 when you're talking 2 million. That's a,
Right, that's just
So,
not a significant amount. It's $2 million.
At any rate, we have just begun fundraising, which we know we need to do. We also feel that as the congregation gets smaller and older, we feel that it would not be responsible for us to spend more money rebuilding something that is then going to still need more upkeep.
We just felt that it's I know it doesn't maybe seem to a lot of people like $2 million is a lot, but we have a small congregation. We do not have a wealthy congregation. People think we do because we have a stone building, but we don't. And so it is going to be incredibly difficult for us to get anywhere near $2 million to rebuild that to its historic background. Then we also looked at the fact that it didn't fix the problem. It was going to continue doing what it did with the freezing and the thawing cycles. All of the people that we talked to, including the architects that were in historic preservation, made it clear that this was going to continue to run several $1,000s or more, maybe even tens of $1,000s every year to make sure that it stayed the way it was supposed to. It was going to require significant outputs of cash at a regular time period to maintain it. I did not feel, as the rector there, that it was responsible to put this kind of a financial burden on the congregation going into the future. I wanted, and the vestry decided that that was what they wanted, to fix the building so it won't have these problems anymore. We can't fix it with a crenellated roof. We can rebuild it to the way it's supposed to be and then we'll have to spend significant amount of money to keep maintaining it. But we felt that that was not responsible for this congregation, that the people in the future shouldn't have to bear that burden of significant costs going into the future because it was attractive. See what I'm saying?
And, okay. And have you had different architects looking at it or just
Three.
one? Mhm.
2 historic architecture firms, including building envelope specialists, and another woman that came in, Rosalie would know her name.
Her opinion is different from what you're representing.
No, I'm not. That's exactly what she said.
I have here the letter she wrote to the vestry.
Well, when we were talking at the meeting at which she attended, she admitted, because I asked her if it would require continued maintenance, and she replied, yes, it would.
Any building does.
Yeah.
Well, not to the tune that this one would.
If we build it right.
I think.
Well, I can also say that we took into consideration the church in Bangor that was very similar to our building, that they did do exactly what you're suggesting. They built it back to the original that it was supposed to be at significant cost to their congregation. And within 5 years, it had failed. And they have now had to remove that tower. And it is now a flat top of the tower, much lower than it was because it didn't work.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you had checked with other sources. I know that, I think that,
John's.
St. John's.
Is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Nancy in her letter said that restoration of the tower is certainly possible, and if properly roofed, blah, 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 could last another 100 years. A maintenance schedule of 20 to 30-year cycles of selective repointing, examination of flashing and other roofing, and 20 to 30 years is not like every other year. I
That's-
mean, it is
That's
saying-
significantly different than what she said at the actual meeting.
Well, that's what the report said, so I was just curious about that. I totally empathize with the cost of building, the cost of, making a structure sound for the future. But I just lament losing historic features of a building as well.
I'm looking at us as going all the way back to its historic beginnings. Were it not for that one rector who decided it would be pretty to put a crenellated roof on something and to go against the architect's wishes to do it the way he felt he had to do it, we would not have had this problem. It would have been built the way the architect had designed it initially. And that's what we're trying to go back to. It's the only thing we found that's going to be permanently take care of the issue with the roofing.
I'm just wondering, what other resources might be available for money for restoration? Have you looked very far other than the local congregation?
We have not started doing that, no. We spent a lot of time getting the plan right and having meetings
Finding a contractor.
and finding a contractor. So no, but we haven't looked. That's what would be the answer.
I'm going to again reiterate, we have a very small congregation. It's really hard for us to do a million things like this and run the place. So no, we haven't had time to do this yet.
Can I, Pat, do you mind if I just, I think it's important for the committee, because the 120-day waiting period, it talks about the owners can work with the Historic Resource Committee during that period. But it's important, I think, for the committee to make a determination on whether or not this piece of the structure is contributing, is significant architecturally and historically because that's what drives this process. If the committee, I mean, it sounds like based on what you said, I would interpret it that it does based on what you said, but I think the committee should probably weigh in and make that call, because then if it is, then you can continue to work with them. They understand that you found that it's contributing, then they can get working on also the historic recordation that may have to happen, right? Should they keep going with the demo? Should it not work out, trying to figure out another alternative? I don't know how long that takes, because you have to get a qualified person to do those historic recordations. And it's a process. So I'm just trying to, keep that going so that they can understand where this is going and what process they need to play by. Because then it still gives the committee and the applicant time to have these conversations. You know what I mean? That makes sense?
Are we at that point? Have we asked all the questions that we want to ask?
Well, I think some of your questions are kind of, when you're asking about, have you sought other resources? Have you, looked at other options? That all is, I think, fair if it is determined that it's contributing or it's significantly architecturally or historically. That's all I'm trying to guide this into the,
That's what we were here for, to ask questions.
Well, you are, but you also have to make a finding on whether or not.
Right,
It's just,
after we answer all the questions.
We have to hear the answers to the questions before we can make our finding.
yeah, I just hear the conversations going into trying to get them to do something else.
Okay.
Which I think is, you're right. I mean, that's your process. It does talk about that, exploring possible alternatives. That's during that 120-day period. And that, we're in that, right? Because they submitted, but if you guys don't find that it is.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood, because I felt like I can't decide if I'm at that period unless I ask the question of whether they've done any due
I
diligence
hear
or
you.
not.
I hear you, but questions like, can you raise money or those kinds of things to do something different or to fix it or to replace it the way it was originally intended? I mean, I guess that's fair, but if it's not historically significant or contributing or architecturally significant, it's kind of a point, because the code officer can then, if you don't find it, the code officer can issue a demo permit tomorrow. Right? I guess that's my only point.
Can we ask some more technical questions, please?
Oh, I think so.
I mean, it's all about it's a lot about the presentation. This is their permit application.
This is the review application. Yeah.
Okay. The tower is all the wires have come apart from a certain point.
Right.
How do you know where that line is? Do you have a line on what that is? And also then, that's granted that needs to come down one way or another, to be rebuilt or something else. But the stone that's being left, what is the condition of that? And why go to all that trouble to save that little bit down there when it would architecturally be much more exciting to do something totally different? But also, if this is an application for the demolition, it doesn't show anything in the application about what's being demolished. And there's a lot more to this than just your drawing here does not show the little spire. That's I think it's for the.
No, it does not show the cupola on the main church.
Okay, but so does that mean that it's going to be removed?
No, we're not doing.
Well, anyway, I'm just thinking that your documents should, this is for what is to be demolished. Your documents should show what is being demolished. You finally have come up with the other drawing.
To your point, I don't show the cupola on this one either.
Okay, but is that being demolished?
No, I didn't feel it was pertinent to what we were doing.
Okay, but
I couldn't
you're
fit
also
what I-
saying, you just said, and it doesn't really indicate here, but are the whole church, all the slates being replaced.
Yes.
Shouldn't your drawings show that on the, I mean, because that's it's an important part is the shape of the roof is the roof covering. And if that's being demolished, it should show up on in your presentation.
Okay, I was under the impression that the main thing here was the so-called
I-
tower.
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind that if someone wants to, on a historic structure, wants to change their roof from slate, and I don't know what
I
they're
know
doing,
that,
it's their prerogative. They can
It
do
is
that
still
without a
demolition.
review. They can do that without a demolition review. Because we're only talking about the build structures, and we're not talking about architectural features. We're talking about structures, Ls, these types of things. And it was determined by the code office that the tower was one of those part of the structure similar to an L, but it's these other features that the Historic Resource Committee doesn't review,
anyway,
like
that's
slate
just-
shingles.
Sake of having drawn up a few of these.
Yeah. I would think you probably got AR 1.1 in your packet, I would think, right?
A4.1.
Well, this is, for some reason, the packet you turned in, it had
Yep.
2 sheets, but I don't know if they got 2 sheets.
No, I didn't get
Here's-
this. Oh, that would have been very
That may have
helpful.
got
Might have got,
missed inadvertently.
yeah.
You want to take a look at that, Chris?
It's just what I would. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that, with you not seeing that, I understand your question. Because I was thinking, well, I thought it was fairly straightforward, but
Well, if there are no other questions, I mean, I think,
Can I get back to my question?
ahead.
How bad is the stone that's being left?
envelope specialist did an investigation. And again, we won't know for sure until some of the demolition takes place. We may find that it's worse than we think. We won't know for sure until some of the demolition takes place.
I just think it would be cleaner just to take all the stone down and start over again and put in a architecturally relating bell tower.
You got a deep pocket?
It would be less money than. And also you'd have the bells exposed and making sound.
That's your opinion.
Could I answer part of your question? Which is the BES report says that the lower part of the wall a lot of it needs repointing and some rebuilding, taking out stones, completely doing them, putting them back. But not that the wall they didn't think was so terrible. So it's the first 14 to 16 feet
Roughly 14 feet.
on the outside that would stay there. And above that is what has to come
They
down.
didn't do any destructive demolition or destructive investigation, so they don't know what the mortar is like between the rides and because it works its way down through the roof.
I don't know if they did destructive, but I know that they, for instance, they proposed and came up with the system of repointing and what needed to be rebuilt on our very front wall of that church with the big stained glass window in it. And they were pretty correct about what parts needed to be completely rebuilt and what parts needed repointing. So no, I don't know if they did destructive testing, but they were good enough to be able to figure out where parts of the wall had separated from its inner layer.
Is that come under the low priority piece, the nave entrance and sacristy walls, repointing, rebuilding of masonry for the entrance nave and sacristy walls and repair it?
No, that's the little,
Okay, I was just asking.
the entrance,
Yep.
which we have included in our contract to have that rebuilt too. That would be just adjacent to the big wall that I'm speaking about.
The big wall Edmund is speaking
This is
about
how-
is the wall of, when was rebuilt, what year?
2017.
Yeah, so it was the big end wall that was rebuilt,
4, 5, 6, was it your first year? Wow, time flies. Yeah.
The whole thing rebuilt by the time I moved.
At any rate, right, because when it rains, that whole entryway is quite damp inside too. And that's a function of slates, flashing, everything.
It's a form.
I think one has to remember that churches don't seem to have an annual maintenance plan as going concerns that are commercial seem to have. We also, I think in churches, have a few people that have been in the church for many years, but over time, there's quite a bit of turnover. So you can't expect us to have great institutional memory, even when it comes to when did we last paint this or do that sort of thing. It takes somebody going back and assuming you keep good records, finding out when you last paid for the painter or the roofer.
Are there any other questions? Rhonda? Questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, well, maybe we should get to, when I was reading all of this and getting prepared for the meeting, I noticed that there were like 4 different processes for dealing with older buildings that are on the historic register or in historic districts. And, there's preservation, which is the pure process of preserving what is there and taking each existing thing and making sure that it's preserved. And then there's the rehabilitation, and that's making compatible use of a property. You can do repairs, alterations, additions, but preserving portions and features to convey its architectural, historical, and cultural properties. And I guess that's where I'm kind of sitting, is that in some ways, when I look at the standards for rehabilitation and it says that a property will be used as it was historically or be given a new use, this is rehabilitation now, this is not restoration. But just for rehabilitation, it requires minimal change to its distinctive features, materials, spaces, and spatial relationships. And so I just think that it's kind of changed the outside space. It changes the inside space of the organ and the flower room because the ceiling will be different.
No,
It won't be different on the inside. It sounded like it in the,
well, that's where, when I spoke a moment ago, I mentioned that the interior was going to remain as it is.
okay, so the ceiling will remain the same.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. But still the spatial area on the outside will be significantly changed. So I guess in summary, I'm feeling like my responsibility is to think about your monetary costs and then to think about the historic building costs. I mean, the historic losses to the building. And it's tough. It's really tough. So I don't know how other members of the committee feel, but I would like to go for the 120-day delay. And I will offer you these resources that I researched online. And I don't know that, I personally haven't used them, but I know the National Fund for Sacred Places has been in existence since 2014, and they've given 97 grants, and many of them are on the East Coast because that's where the older buildings are. So, there are possibilities. There's also the National Trust grant programs. And you said the Main Steeples Fund was too small. I didn't look into that, but there were also the National Park Service has grants. And I know that Maine Historic Preservation Commission has money, of which most of it goes to towns that are certified local governments, and we are not, but they do. Maine Historic Preservation Commission also has grant funding. So on that basis, just that there may be some money out there, I guess I would be in favor of the 120 delay.
Well, I agree with you, Pat, and I think if the biggest hurdle to preservation is the cost, which is what I think I'm hearing, that it behooves you to explore all those options. And so at least we have that to go on. So I would ask to see what those options are and just how you could make it work for your building.
Can I say again, it's not the cost. It's not just the cost. We have found out through all the architects we've worked with that it's not going to fix the problem. We're going to still have the problem of the building deteriorating, despite what Nancy said. Other architects we have talked with said it is going to require huge maintenance. It's a cost not just to build, but for this congregation to support into the future. I can honestly say that if we're going to have to rebuild the tower, it could kill the church. Not only the cost of rebuilding it, but maintaining it.
Well, I would ask you, if you're leaving like 2/3 of the tower and you're repairing what's left of that outer coating, what guarantee do you have, even if you replace the top of it, that you're not going to have ongoing maintenance costs?
We can't guarantee that, but we can say that with a roof over the stonework, there's a lot less chance for rainwater to get into the walls. That's the problem when you have masonry that has just masonry as at the top level. Rain gets into the joint, and then in the winter it freezes, and that's where you get the problem, is the freeze-thaw cycles.
When I read the EBS report, they felt that they could do that, though. I don't remember specifically, but they felt that they could solve the problem.
They could, but then we get back to the expense piece, and still it still needs maintenance more than a roof that sheds water.
Okay.
So I think, well, this is the process, so we'll go through this, but we have signed a contract with a contractor to start. Certainly after the 120 days and whatever else would be required. I don't think that vestry is going to go back and change a vote over after we have done this planning for a couple of years,
Right.
3 years, 4 years.
Might they consider looking into some sources of revenue, though?
Yeah, we could.
And they may, in fact, help you if you go with your
Oh, yes.
plan is
I think-
designed now.
I-
That may help you.
Yes, we'd certainly, any grants, as I say, we've just finished the design bit and now we need to raise the money. I was put in charge of that too.
Oh.
So I'll be hitting you all up.
Chris, did you want to weigh in on your?
I lost the sound, sorry. I didn't hear that, those last few minutes. That's okay.
Well, I think we need to determine that this is a historically significant part of the structure and all that.
Correct.
And so I propose that we do that. We
Someone
say yes, that it
make a
is.
motion
Make a motion that is.
that it's contributing and
Okay.
architecturally significant and architecturally or historically and architecturally significant. Is that
Okay.
true?
I'll second that. And I guess we have to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
3 on your committee?
Yeah. That's what we got today, yes.
Okay.
I recused myself. You know how I feel.
All right.
Um,
Is that it? No, now I suppose we need to know the process.
Is the public allowed to ask questions?
The public can ask some questions. The chair, you want to entertain some comment from the public? I mean, I think the big issue was whether or not this was determined to be significant, and it was. Yes.
Okay, we'll entertain questions from the,
This is a question that Beatty Parker, who just had to leave, but she asked me to ask, is the bell system, which is the bells, Carolyn, is that something that can be restored or used? Because that, for what Beatty said, that is part of the community. It's something the community felt a loss of when it stopped. And so that was.
We weren't going to keep the entire Carillon because we didn't have space for it. We talked about putting it in a structure that was outside of the tower to keep it. But we felt that since they're change bells, I don't know if you know the difference between a Carillon and change bells. These are old English bells that when they used to ring bells in England, they would do changes. They wouldn't do songs per se because they didn't. Can I finish, Rosalie? That's what they were designed for ringing changes. When we tried to attempt to play songs with them, they would inevitably skip notes or end a note early or whatever because they don't have all the notes there. We are keeping a bell because we use it for liturgical purposes. It'll be able to be used during the service, during weddings, during funerals. That is in part of the design that you saw. We had not thought about that we would keep the rest only because it plays twice a day, incomplete songs instead of changes. And so I hadn't heard until now that there was a big desire to keep it.
In fact, we had heard others in town, thank God, those bells stopped. Right. So,
Carol.
and then, and as I said earlier, if that bell tower had been built properly and been taller, the bells would have been up higher, and then maybe people would be more annoyed, maybe people would be less annoyed. I don't know. Maybe that would be a source of fundraising. Oh, you like our bells? Then please give us money. Or, oh, you don't like our bells? Then maybe we'll put a roof. I don't know. But at any rate, yes, we have, but the bell company sends us an email about every 6 months wondering what we're going to do. We hope to sell them back. And again, going forward, it may be that's instead of that, it may be that they're a fundraising item. I don't know. I mean, they're quite expensive, I think, to buy, but I think secondhand, they might not have much value.
We used to live right next to a large, tall Episcopal church, and that had chain bells and all that. They're very good players on it. My birthday, they played it.
happy birthday.
So I could hear the mechanism going off, and it goes do. And fortunately, at midnight, they turned off. Once an hour, every 15 minutes.
Are there more public comment?
So who are the preservation architects that you spoke to besides Nancy and besides BES?
That's it. That's two.
Oh, I thought you said 3. I'm sorry.
Did you hear that, Rhonda?
Yes, I heard that.
Okay.
So what's the next step now?
So the next step, during this 120-day period, the committee is hopefully wanting to work with you the best they can, obviously, to come up with other options. It sounds like you've got your option what you're going to go with. It also encourages you to work with interested parties about salvaging and recycling any of the reusing any of the materials that get demolished. But I think what's critical is that historic recordation that needs to happen. And we can give you some information on it. But we did not go with the full, when I helped the committee draft this ordinance, there's a historic recordation, I forget, HARBS, or I don't remember exactly what it is. That's an acronym for something. But we tried to do is we tried to limit it because that can be very costly and a very long process because you have to hire a qualified individual that meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. And then they have to do black and white photographs that are archival. I mean, that's kind of the intent. But what the ordinance says, consistent with the intent of those standards. So we can get together and work with you on what you need to submit. We'll share that with the committee. And I think the committee would probably work with us and be willing to make it work. It is not, you don't have to do one as if this is like a federal project where there's federal money involved and they're demolishing a building where it's going away. And again, it's a very archival document that gets stored, so we'll work with you on getting what you need we'll send you that document. And the intent is to be consistent with the intent of that document. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow every item if that makes sense to you. Yes, I will work with Chuck on that. Yeah. Chuck, I do know a couple of architectural historians that have done some of these before, so I can maybe share their names with you. Sure. I'm not recommending any of them. I've just worked with them in the past.
I think probably a significant piece of that would be copies of the original tower.
Yes, that is generally one of the pieces of the
right. And until the wrapping comes off, you can take all the pictures you want, but it wouldn't be historically accurate.
I would leave that to the professional that is doing this.
Right.
I'm sure this is not
This is going to then cost us more money.
It will cost you some. I don't know what that will be, but yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful if we could get this too. If we could get
A copy of that. I mean, maybe Chuck, I don't know if you have the ability to scan that document. I mean, I'm sure that the
Yes, I
architectural
do.
historian will need it anyway, as part of it.
Yes.
Also, I would like to offer, if you're interested, there is a member of our committee who has successfully gotten a grant from the Fund for Sacred Places. And if you're interested in talking with her, she wasn't able to attend today, but she could give you the ins and outs of how that worked and how it went and, and you,
Right. I'm not sure how much time I have to do all of this.
well, see, she has experience writing that grant. I bet, we could help you out with that. I would like to help you out with that.
Thank you. It's just, I have so much to do now. Thinking about writing grants is just enough to make me want to retire.
Okay.
A smaller version. Do you want a smaller version of this?
It'd be fun, or just a
Right.
good photograph of it. JPEG.
Well,
So it is a 120-day waiting period. That 120 days has already started. This is the process. We can work with Chuck on what he needs to submit and what process moves forward from here. Once we get that recordation, then the code officer can technically issue that demolition permit.
Okay. Yes, definitely work with Chuck. Chuck knows how to get it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand.
Edmund,
I have a
could I?
question, because there are a couple of us who are abutters to this project, and maybe three of us. How, I asked this question
Thanks, Gordon.
before, and when we were in the church, and I didn't get an answer about the process of demolition, how it will affect the street in front and the property itself, that's right across from us.
Right. I can't give you much of an answer. I know that the contractor is thinking of using a man lift rather than scaffolding to take the thing down. So I don't think the street will be impacted. I think maybe the person who rents the apartment may not be able to park in front, but maybe on the side of the rectory. So beyond that, I can't tell you until we get closer to construction or demolition, then construction, then we can then find out and plan. But it really, although expensive, it's not a lot of square footage, that tower. And, yes, it will cost money to take it down, and then put a roof on it, but it's not a huge lot of square feet sort of project.
Okay, well, I just want to wrap this up. Anybody else have any questions? before we start?
Are we to assume that demolition will be the final result?
I think,
It has to be demolished no matter what happens after
I
that.
think that's the
That's,
final result,
unless,
unless over the
Unless
next,
they find
while
it.
they're doing this recordation, they can.
Even if somebody donated $3 million, we could rebuild it as it is, it still needs to be demolished. That,
And then we would still probably not put a flat roof on it, because flat roofs leak.
If they're built wrong.
They leak on every school, they leak on every church. The kid throws a Frisbee on a roof, that's an act of vandalism on a flat roof. On a slopey roof, the Frisbee comes off.
Roofs in Damascus
Nancy
for
suggested
5,000
ways to
years.
do the roof differently from how it is right now, that would alleviate that.
And then it would be more expensive than what we're doing.
And you're right about having to take down what is there now, in the sense that when we did that on the front facade on Chestnut Street, they took out the stones carefully, and replaced them carefully. And that's the way the restoration would happen if we were restoring the tower.
We would still have to take it down. In 1945, it had to come down.
Yes, you take it down, but you take it down.
No, it would have to come down all at once and then be built back all new. You can't take it down one and put in a new one. It's too far gone for that. That's what we've been told. All right, thank you.
well, thank you for,
So,
You have a lot of slates, so that there'll be a lot of house number signs and slates. And you got to get the congregation out.
There is something to be said for that.
Things on
I'm wondering though, well,
Fundraising.
they're kind of soft. I mean, we were told that the day they were put up, they were kind of the cheaper slates available. If they had been really hard black slate, that roof would still be okay. All right, so,
Josh,
Yeah.
with Chuck, and we'll get you on
Yep.
that. And then we'll obviously share the recordation with the committee, and if we have any questions, or we'll share them with the committee as well, but we'll keep this whole process open between the church and the architect and the committee and our office as well. I know, I mean, this is hard,
it is.
we get it. I mean, I don't think I'd sit as a historic resource committee member, but I get it. None of these are easy. I used to do historic preservation for the city of Bangor when anytime you wanted to do anything to the building, a historic building, you had to go for a review. And those can be challenging, especially if people weren't planning for it or didn't think that it applied to them. But historic resources and character, are significant to a community. And the intent is to try to protect them. I think the committee knows and the town knows you can't always protect them. And at some point they go away, unfortunately, but.
The sons were christened.
Well, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I'd like to give you my phone number.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Janice, I'm just gonna end this on here.
Go ahead.